She stood there for a while, her small hand resting on the edge of the bench, feeling the smooth grain of the wood beneath her fingers, the lamp casting a soft halo around them both as the man quietly returned each tool to its place with the same care he had always shown. Not rushing, not speaking, just letting the moment stretch like warm light over old pages, and the puppet watched him, her painted eyes catching a glint of the brass key still hanging from the nail above, the same one he had turned so gently to wake her. And though she did not speak, could not yet, there was something in the way she tilted her head, in the way she turned slightly to look at the heart box now closed and humming faintly inside her chest, that told him she understood, not everything perhaps, but enough to know she had been made with love, held with patience, and brought back not because he had to, but because he wanted her to feel again the quiet joy of being, of moving, of noticing the world unfold around her. Outside, the wind had softened to nothing. The trees stood still in the dark, and the house held its breath as if afraid to break the spell. But the puppet took one more step, her joints steady now, her frame light and sure, and the man smiled. Not a wide smile, just the kind that came from the corner of the eyes, like something remembered, something returned, and he pulled the small wooden chair closer to the bench and sat, his hands resting in his lap, and she stepped beside him, her eyes fixed forward, not on the tools or the box or the lamp, but on the quiet space ahead. And there they sat, not speaking, not needing to, as the night folded gently around the workshop like a blanket tucked in, and the clock on the wall ticked on, soft and sure. No longer the only heart in the room, the next morning came slow and golden, light pouring through the workshop windows in wide, warm bands that touched the floor and climbed the walls, brushing over the bench, the shelves, and the small wooden figure now curled gently on the cushion of the chair, her arms resting by her sides, head tilted not in waiting this time, but in sleep, the faintest hum still ticking quietly in her chest, steady and calm like the breath of someone dreaming. And the man, already up, moved softly through the room, careful not to make noise, placing a kettle on the stove, folding a cloth, opening the shutters one by one to let in the scent of morning, dew on pine, the earthy touch of rain in the distance, and the soft rustle of birds starting their song somewhere in the trees beyond. And when he turned back to the chair, he paused, hand resting lightly on the edge of the bench, just watching her sleep in that stillness not of silence, but of peace, a stillness that belonged not to something waiting to be fixed, but something whole now, something at rest. And in that moment, he did not think of the broken gear or the years it had sat silent, or even the long nights he had worked with aching fingers and a careful heart. He thought only of now, of the quiet joy in this shared breath of light between them, and he smiled to himself, almost afraid to move, as if even kindness might wake her too soon. Outside, the rain began to fall in a fine, steady mist, tapping softly against the windows, running in slow threads down the glass as the man sat beside the small wooden chair, sipping from a warm mug cradled between his hands, the scent of tea curling up like a ribbon of steam. And the puppet? No, the girl now, for there was something unmistakably alive in the way her fingers shifted ever so slightly, as if chasing the memory of a dream, remained still but not unfeeling, her chest rising with the quiet rhythm of the ticking heart box nestled inside, its sound no longer hollow but full, like footsteps on a wooden floor in a house long closed, and now opened again to light and air. And though her eyes did not blink, they caught the reflection of the flame dancing inside the small stove, holding it there like a secret. And the man reached out slowly, brushing a strand of wood-fine hair from her brow, not because it was in the way, but because the gesture had been waiting in his hands for years, and she, though still learning the language of motion, let one hand rest lightly atop his with no more weight than a breath, the contact small, but echoing deeply through the quiet room. And outside the workshop, the world listened without intruding, the trees bending slightly. In the wind, the path leading away from the door softened with moss and memory, but for now neither of them looked to it, for the story inside had not finished turning its final page. It had only just begun to speak. The light in the workshop had grown dimmer now, the last stretch of evening pressing close against the windows, and the small lamp on the bench glowed like a quiet star while the man, with slow and gentle movements, closed the back of the heart box with a soft click, and set down the tiny screwdriver, his hands steady, his breath held for just a moment longer. And then, in the stillness, the ticking began. Not loud, not hurried, but steady and sure, like the echo of footsteps returning home. And she felt it then, the warmth blooming behind her ribs, the quiet clockwork hum spreading outward like ripples across a still pond. And her hands, once resting without weight, now curled ever so slightly, as if remembering what it was to hold, to reach, to be, and her head tilted with more purpose now, no longer the frozen angle of waiting but the beginning of a choice. And the man, watching her with eyes that shimmered in the lamplight, let out a breath that had waited in his chest for seasons, and he smiled. Not wide, not loud, just the kind of smile made of relief and promise. And he whispered, "Welcome back," though he wasn't sure if she heard. And maybe it didn't matter, because in that moment the puppet was no longer only wood and hinges and careful paint, but something more, something filled with breathless wonder. And as the night settled in fully outside the walls, wrapping the world in hush, the two of them remained in the golden pool of lamplight, quiet and whole. And somewhere in the soft ticking between them, the story closed its eyes, not ended, only resting. The workshop was still and quiet as the evening gently folded over the hills outside, the last gold of the sun streaming in through the tall windows in a single soft line. Inside, the light from a single lamp glowed steady on the wooden bench, casting long, gentle shadows across the tools that lay neatly where they'd been left. Everything in the room was in its place. The air was full of the familiar scent of wood shavings, warm varnish, and old oil, wrapping the space in a sense of calm. The man was not there just yet. He had stepped out, perhaps for a short walk, as he sometimes did when the day had been long and full of quiet work. In the corner, the stove clicked faintly as it cooled, and a half-full mug sat waiting beside it. On a low stool by the bench sat the puppet, made of cherrywood and pine, her small brass joints glinting in the soft light, her head tilted ever so slightly to one side, her hands folded in her lap, unmoving. Her painted eyes gazed toward nothing in particular, but they held a stillness that almost felt like waiting. Nearby on the workbench, resting close to her, was a small heart box, no bigger than a curled hand, with a brass lock and a keyhole shaped like a star. It had not ticked in many days. The tiny gears inside had long since grown still, a cog cracked, a pin slipped, a fine dust settled in the corners. But still it was hers. The man had promised he would fix it, and she remembered that. Outside, a soft breeze stirred the edge of the old paper on the wall, a drawing of another heart box, perhaps newer or only imagined. Then the breeze passed, and silence returned like a familiar friend. The thick walls held the world at bay, letting peace settle back in. The wood shavings on the floor curled gently where they'd fallen, some resting beneath the rug, others near her stool. He always meant to sweep them, but he said they were part of the work, the skin of the thing that mattered. A dented tin of tiny screws sat by the lamp, its contents precisely arranged, even if they didn't look it at first glance. The puppet remembered the feeling of her ticking heart, not loud, not sharp, but a soft rhythm that once filled her from within, as natural as breathing. She missed that sound, not in her ears, but in her chest where the quiet had since settled. Then, without fanfare, the door opened. No creak, no rush of air, just the soft sound of someone returning. The man stepped in and closed the door behind him. In his hands was something wrapped in a cloth. He crossed the room and placed it gently beside the heart box. He didn't speak, just removed his coat and drew the lamp a little closer. The light glinted off the brass edges of the box, making it look almost new again. The man took a slow breath, wiped his hands on a cloth, and leaned in. The puppet watched him. Her eyes did not move, but they had always seen him. The old clock ticked steadily on the far wall, a slow rhythm that filled the room with a quiet sense of time passing just as it should. Outside, the wind traced around the edges of the building, brushing gently against the walls like a lullaby. Thunder rumbled softly far away, not coming closer, not going farther. The man unwrapped the cloth, revealing his tools, small, careful things, a screwdriver, a lens, tweezers wrapped in soft cloth. He studied the heart box for a long moment, his eyes warm with memory and quiet purpose. Then he smiled, just a little. "All right," he said. "Let's have another go." He opened the back of the box and leaned close. The gears inside were still and silent, but not beyond care. With slow, precise movements, he lifted a pin, brushed away a thread of dust, turned one cog with care. He adjusted the spring. It was still strong. Nodding to himself, he reached up for the brass key that had waited on its nail above the bench for all this time. He hadn't used it in years, but tonight, he turned it gently in the lock. And for the first time in a long time, the tiniest sound returned. A faint click, a soft turn, and the quiet beginning of a tick, light as a whisper, steady as a heartbeat. The puppet didn't move. Not yet, but inside her, something warmed, something turned. Not loud, not sudden, but there, like morning light spilling slowly across a quiet room. And as the clock kept ticking on the wall, and the wind curled sleepily through the trees outside, the workshop settled into the soft comfort of stillness again, holding its breath not with waiting, but with peace. The little heart box ticked just once more and then again. Each sound so small it almost disappeared into the hush of the workshop, but it was there, a rhythm beginning to wake, like a melody returning from a long silence. And though the puppet did not yet move, something inside her began to listen, not with ears but with the deep remembering of what it felt like to belong to time. The man leaned closer, watching the way the gears turned, so slowly, hesitantly at first, as if they too were unsure whether they should begin again after so long. But he murmured something soft, words not meant to be heard so much as felt, and he placed one finger gently on the edge of the open box, steadying it as the mechanism caught its breath, the way an old friend does when asked if they remember something they thought they had forgotten, and the ticking grew steadier, almost like a lullaby that had never quite finished. Outside, the sky deepened into a soft blue-gray, and stars began to prick the edges of the horizon, quiet and certain in their appearance, as if they had also been waiting for the moment to feel right. The man adjusted the last tiny screw, turned the brass key once more to make sure it held, and then sat back, not speaking, just watching, just listening, as if he too were afraid to break the spell. And in the soft glow of the lamplight, the puppet blinked once, slow, deliberate, not because she had to, but because something inside her wanted to, something remembered. And though her arms did not lift and her legs did not yet bend, her painted eyes shifted ever so slightly toward the man, and for a breathless moment, they simply looked at each other in silence, not needing words. Just that shared quiet between a maker and the thing he once made, now remade. The ticking continuing, faint but faithful, a promise kept without being spoken. The ticking held steady through the hush of the workshop, a sound so soft it could have been imagined. But it was real, steady as breath. And as the man leaned back in his chair, his hands resting open on his lap, something in the air shifted, not loud or sudden, but like the moment just before the first leaf falls in autumn, and the puppet, still seated on her stool, felt that rhythm inside her chest, not just as a sound but as warmth, as a kind of invitation, and it moved through her like a memory returning. Her fingers, still curved in her lap, twitched once, so slightly it might have been missed, but the man saw it, and he didn't speak, just waited, not wanting to interrupt. Her shoulders lifted next, slowly, as if learning again what it meant to carry her own weight, and then her neck turned, the motion smooth but hesitant, like the first word on a page waiting to be read aloud. Her eyes, once painted still, found his again, and though they did not change, the way they met his gaze was different now, aware, quiet, and filled with something like wonder. Her left hand lifted, hovering above her lap, the brass hinge creaking softly in the silence, and her palm opened as if reaching not for anything in particular, but simply for the feel of motion again. The man's eyes welled, just slightly, and he gave her the smallest nod. Nothing grand, just enough to say, "I see you, little one." Outside, the wind had settled, the trees stilled as if even the world paused to listen, and inside the room, nothing moved but her, one joint at a time, slow and careful, like someone relearning how to be in the world. And as the heart box ticked on quietly in her chest, the puppet finally stepped down from the stool, her wooden foot meeting the rug with the faintest sound, and the man, still silent, simply smiled. The light had faded completely now, leaving only the golden pool from the workbench lamp to hold back the dark, and in that gentle circle of warmth, the puppet stood, unmoving but not still, her limbs now aware, her heart ticking slow and sure inside the cherrywood chest the man had so carefully mended, and he watched her without speaking, letting her learn again the weight of being, of balance, of breathless presence. Her gaze turned slightly toward the shelf where the mug still sat, half full and cooling, and then to the stove where a low warmth still clung to the iron sides, and then back to him, her creator, her caretaker, the one who had waited as long as she had for this moment. And he raised his hand slowly, offering no words, only his presence, steady and open like the walls of the workshop themselves. She tilted her head, listening again to the rhythm inside, not just the gears but the memory of motion, and then she stepped forward, another soft creak of hinge, another whisper of wood on rug, as the dust lifted just slightly around her feet, and the man moved not at all, except to let his breath go as though he'd been holding it for years. And outside, the trees whispered again, a soft hush like lullaby, like wind on paper, as the puppet reached the bench and placed one hand gently on its edge, steadying herself not from weakness but from wonder, and somewhere deep within the walls, the house creaked too, not in protest but in recognition, as if the space itself welcomed her back into it, not as a still thing to be fixed, but as something, living again in her own quiet way.